You know, I'm going to talk about a few people here in this video. They're famous, but they also never really existed. Of course, that's up to you. I'm talking about people like George Washington, Genghis Khan, Santa Claus, Mary Magdalene, John Byrne. Put your thinking cap on. The first one, St. Christopher. That's that little medal they hang up in their mirror in the car, and St. Christopher medal protects you and stuff. Some people believe that he did. His story begins, centuries after Jesus Christ, when he carried an unknown child across a river as an act of goodwill, shortly before the child revealed himself to be Jesus Christ. Now, that's part of the story I never heard of, but that's the story. Then there's Confucius. He's a Far East wisdom font of the Far East. Confucius was helped many of us figure out a good way to improve our lives. He's known as one of the wisest and most thoughtful philosophers in Chinese history. But a lack of evidence has many researchers calling him a figure of imagination, which I tend to believe. If you see me looking away, I'm looking down here to push the button to scroll, because I'm reading this stuff. On the other hand, Confucius' family, the Kongs, have the longest recorded pedigree in the world, stretching back 83 generations to Confucius himself. It's certainly possible that many of the sayings weren't his, or the legend has been inflated. But it's hard to argue with the actual genealogy that goes back to the man himself. How about King Arthur? You know King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and all that stuff? I don't believe he really existed. One of the most famous Western historical figures, he pulled a sword from a stone, ruled Britain, and did plenty more, but he probably didn't exist. I don't know. Or was at least a mashup of a number of other figures, such as the Roman military commanders, the British king during the 5th century. He may not have ever fought a killer rabbit. I never heard of that one. Anyway, how about John Byrne? I gotta say this before I discuss John Byrne. I used to be a Republican. I am not now. I used to be a Democrat. I am not now. Trump was already pulling one over on reporters back in the 80s when reporters would call the Trump.org for a statement. They were often directed to the official spokesperson, John Byrne, who was quotable in multiple print stories about Trump and the family over the years. But Under oath, he revealed that he had been his own official spokesman for years without anyone noticing. So there you got John Byrne. All right, how about Mary Magdalene from the Bible? She's not Jesus' mother. Instead, she's the repentant sinner that washes his feet in expensive perfume and witnesses his resurrection. The confusion comes from the fact that many believe she was working in a not very respectable occupation, prostitution. It's just a nice way of saying you're a whore. But there's no biblical evidence of that. Mary was a popular name at the time and has it been ever since, so it's possible she got mixed up with another character. There's also no scripture other than that she would later become Mary Poppins. Boy, that's a stretch. No, she just simply washed the Messiah's feet. And here's another. This has got something to do with algebra. There's a person that come up with this stuff about triangles and their sides, but he might not have been a real person. Historians have no proof that he wrote any of his work down, making it hard to give him any credit. Robin Hood. Robin Hood wasn't a fetching fox. Next, you're going to tell us Prince John's advisor, Sir Hiss, wasn't a hilariously villainous talking snake. While the Robin Hood tale becomes popular in 1340s, it has never confirmed as truthful. I've never believed it. It's a crock. Matter of fact, a lot of that stuff way back there in the 1340s was a crock. And remember Mulan, M-U-L-A-N, there was a movie, Disney had a movie come out about her. It's based on a Chinese folk tale. The tale follows much the same story. The main character, Mulan, takes her father's place in the conscription, fights against nomadic hordes, and eventually reveals her gender, much to the astonishment of her comrades. That was Mulan. Whether she existed, however, scholars don't believe the tale to be a fictional one. The first record of the story was a folk song believed to have been composed during the Northern Wei dynasty, which ran from 386 AD to 535. There was no goofy dragon either. All right, before you get all huffy now, William Shakespeare. This is very much debated, which, with most on the side of the bards. There are some who question the legitimacy of the Shakespeare name. Obviously, the plays are real, and someone did get them. Write them. They spell right wrong. Someone did write them. That tells me they're copying this from somewhere else too, because someone did write them. They got spelled R-I-G-H-T. It's W-R-I-T-E. Even Timon of Athens. Some researchers, however, believe that it was a pen name. One third says that he was actually a man named Edward de Vere, and that all his work was published up to this under the norm diploma of Shakespeare, while only a small number of academics believe in his theory. There is continued interest by people who were really bored during school. I was bored during school. Yes, I was. Ann Tyler, if you love to browse a fashion magazine, means something for me. Everyone else, Ann Tyler was a shop that began night, and while many people think this Tyler gal was real, she was just a creation of Richard Liebenstein. Ann Tyler was not just the name of a garment in Liebenstein's store. So Ann Taylor wasn't real. How about that? How about Taro Tishimoto when the Buffalo Sabres picked up Taro Smith in that draft? He became an overnight a football player, but he didn't exist. No player by this name until much later. He didn't exist. Socrates. I've heard of Socrates. He was a philosopher of some sort. That's like saying that Winston Churchill wasn't real. However, we don't know really that Socrates was like all of the sayings of philosophers attributed to man came from the writings of his disciples, primarily Plato. That could be possible there, I guess. David Manning. Movie critics get by solely on them, so when the opinions of one David Manning started sending moviegoers to flops like A Knight's Tale and The Animal, people started wondering what the guy was on. Many suspected Manning of being paid off by Sony, but it turns out the man never really existed. I never heard of him until right now. David Manning doesn't ring a bell at all. Mike Stevens was a bored Washington, D.C. teen. He wanted to have a little bit of artistic, so he started creating album covers. He created them for a fictitious musical artist named Manning Mike. He went wild with the idea of creating more than 50 albums for the funk and soul art, including a Bruce Lee concept, so it's pretty great. Prester John. He was a legendary king who reigned somewhere in the Orient during it was between the 12th and 17th centuries. That's a big gap. Anyway, in fact, it might have been that entire period since it was thought Prester John had discovered the fountain of youth, which kept his body and mind eternal. I don't believe that crap. Laozi, spelled Laozi, often portrayed as a 6th century BC contemporary of Confucius. He is a reputed author of the Tao Te Ching, the founder of traditional Taoism. He's regarded as a deity in religious Taoism and traditional Chinese, and still there are far too many conflicting stories about his life to nail down anything specific about him. And you know what? That's gonna about one. Well, no, here's one more. Alan Smithley. Head to imdb.com and look for Alan Smithley, and you'll find a frankly ridiculous number of movies and other projects going back line. None of them good at all. In reality, this name is now used by directors or other people who don't want their name on a finished product, usually because it sucks. I can believe that. Jenny Geddes, the butterfly effect tells us that small, insignificant acts can lead to big consequences at a time when tensions were high between Scotland and Britain. In 1637, Britain was forcing Scottish churches to use the Book of Common Prayer. Well, one permanent Jenny Geddes wasn't going to take it. Britain's always had a church problem. They don't know if they're Protestant or Catholic. I don't guess they're either one. She delivered a withering insult and threw her stool chair specifically at the Dean of Edinburgh, which ultimately resulted in the War of the Three Kingdoms and King Charles execution. But there's no other information about this Miss Geddes. It could have been a fake name, or it could have been someone in the skies there to intentionally cause a riot. With a sunburned face, the Marlboro Man. Yes, he existed, and you always seen him on billboard stuff advertising Marlboro cigarettes, the Marlboro Man, and he died from cancer. Dusty clothes and a long dart hanging from his lips. The Marlboro made smoking cool. Of course, it was little more than an advertising icon. It's specifically Marlboro cigarettes, and it seems to have worked gangbusters. I'm looking at a picture of that right now. The Marlboro Man. He used to could advertise cigarettes. He can't anymore. Unfortunately, it seemed to have worked against the Marlboro Company and cigarettes since four of the directors who portrayed Marlboro Man died of smoking. Since four of that who portrayed the Marlboro Man died of smoking-related disease since the ad started airing in the picture. Correlation might not mean causation, but you have to admit there's a correlation. And Caprice cigarette companies led to the removal of the M&M. Four of them died from cancer. I didn't know there was four different ones. I thought there was just one. Shows you what the doctor knows. Lene Kakua, you're probably familiar with the name Minotel, even if you don't follow America, but he made it 20 years that his girlfriend. Anybody ever heard of Mavis Bacon or Beacon? B-E-A-C-O-N. Many of us use computer keyboards every day to type, whether it's penning the next great American novel, writing email, or typing out angry tweets. We all have Mavis Beacon to thank for our keyboards because she's not a real person. At first, the character was just a photo of a model, but as technology and expressions of series increased, that evolved into videos and more. So Mavis wasn't. The name comes from Mavis Staples, one of Software's world's favorite singers, and the word beacon, an allusion to the character's role as a guide to typing. She's still confident and efficient, and even though you might have made a mistake, that's okay. Just try it again, folks. Paul Bunyan. Everybody knows about Paul Bunyan, heard of Paul Bunyan. Whether he ever existed or not, I don't know. I would think not. He was a giant lumberjack, so big and powerful that he logged entire states, built mountains with his bare hands, and had a big blue ox. I remember the big ox. As a Canadian French tall tale, the character has plenty of stories behind him, just as many or more fiberglass statues along the northern border of the states. Paul Bunyan. He's not real, for sure. How about Carolyn Keene? anybody ever heard of Carolyn Keene? If you like to read heart-pounding mysteries when you're a child, no doubt you came across either the Nancy Drew Mysteries or the Boy-Centric Partners, the Hardy Boys Mysteries. All of the Drew books were penned under the name Carolyn Keene, but no such woman existed. How did I know that was coming? Multiple writers contribute to this long-running extensive series thanks to the man behind it, Edward Statenmeyer. He started the books himself but quickly found himself too busy. He hired a number of ghostwriters who all added to the collection under the Keene name. Just how many writers were there? Time to get to the bottom of the mystery. Pope Joan. This is some Pope Joan. Pope Joan in the story was a woman that reigned as the Holy Father for an unknown number of years during the Middle Ages. Usually the tale ends with that she managed to... I don't believe this from the get-go. There's never been a woman pope. She disguised herself as a man, eventually being elected pope. I don't believe it. However, True Count Joan gives birth during her procession, and she dies shortly after while the story was popular. So, if she gave birth, aren't the Catholic fathers and popes and stuff, aren't they supposed to be not be having sex and stuff? And I could crack a joke here, but I've got friends that are Catholics. I respect that. Some believe it to be entirely fictional. The earliest version of the story comes from 13th century, and the events are set in 1099. Pope, a woman, my goodness. Her name, Betty Crocker. I've heard of Betty Crocker. I know my wife had. She had a lot of Betty Crocker's cookbooks. She never really existed. Despite being the queen of the kitchen for more than a few generations, she was only a fictional character invented to give a humanized aspect to the cookbook that the company was selling. Now I believe that. And they got all these pictures here. I'm looking at one 1936, 1955, 65, 68, 72, 1980, 1986. My goodness. She never got old. Her character was created in 1921, which later became General Mills. Many women have portrayed her anonymously, but they had their own names. Sybil Luddington. Now, I've never heard of that, but I'm curious. There are many stories and tales about the American. Many of them are true involving figures like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, but some of them just don't stand up to scrutiny. One example is that of Sybil Luddington, a girl of only 16, who is said to have played a significant role in alerting militia forces in New York of approaching British troops, similar to Paul Revere. Now, nobody knows. These folks don't know. She may have, she may not. However, the name first appeared in writing in 1880, more than 100 years after her supposed rise, which cast plenty of doubts on the tale. The Daughters of the American Revolution have also determined it's likely Ludington never existed, or at least the story is fictional. But, I mean, the fact is, nobody lived in that. We don't know. Everybody has their opinion. We don't know. Zorro. Everybody's heard of Zorro. You remember Zorro, the TV show? He cut a Z in a sign, had a mask on. Whether you picture Antonio Banderas fighting with Scanlon or you imagine one of the early versions of the character, you're still just picturing a fictional creation. He was created by Pope writer John Constantine, fighting against corrupt in an all-black costume, man, which must have been sweltering in that California heat. I never believed it was true either. Well, it's no doubt that now I can speak some Spanish. Zorro, that's fox. Zorro, Spanish for fox, was fictional. Inspiration came from a number of places. Chief among them was the bandit whose life was fictionalized in the 1854 downright by John Roland Reyes. His closest literary probably says not true. Helen of Troy. Now, I kind of believe, without reading this, I kind of believe that Helen of Troy was true. The most beautiful woman in the world is a subjective marker, but historically, it's been given to Helen of Troy, who was so beautiful she started wars, specifically the war that take place in, I can't pronounce it, Elad. While it's very likely there was a woman that inspired some animosity between the power armies of the Greek states at that period, it wasn't the woman we all know. So Helen of Troy wasn't real. Her father was Zeus. I didn't know that. The leader of the Greek gods. We can safely assume that some of the details have been manipulated for the purposes of classic stories. James S.A. Now, who is this? James Corey. That's got something to do with this. He wrote Star Wars. No, he didn't either. And here's another name I can't pronounce. Lycurgus. Lycurgus. But there was much more to the city-state. Lycurgus was one of the area's greatest legal minds, but while numerous Greek writers mention him, the stories are often contradict each other. Some scholars have hypothesized that Lycurgus was just a name writers used when they wanted to discuss Sparta's legal system at the way to remain. I don't know. Now, Sun TZU. Okay, Jack Dawson, Rosebud Guitar they were in the movie Titanic. You might be wondering if the characters Jack Dawson, Rose DeWitt, but guitar are real. Sadly to say, they aren't. But there is a little bit of basis for Rose from American artist Beatrice Wood, who otherwise had no connection to the Titanic, so they weren't real. And there's some people says they are. I can't pronounce that name. It's Bhai and Bala. Guru Nanak is well known as the founder of the Sikh religion, but not as much is known about his apparent lifelong friend and traveling partner, and that he went on a life-changing journey They got all these names in here. I can't pronounce them. And I hate trying to read something I can't pronounce the word. And last but not least is the Buddha. As one of the world's largest and oldest religions, Buddhism still has plenty of questions about the founder. Siddhartha Gautama, more commonly known as the Buddha. I didn't know it was the oldest religion. Unfortunately, this is literally ancient history. The events of his life are said to have happened more than 2,500 years ago, and many of the details of his life have been yet to be found or have been lost entirely. He wasn't known as the Buddha, one who has achieved perfect spiritual enlightenment until centuries after his death. So that means it's all hearsay. I don't know. I said last but not least is the junk dauber. Do I really exist? Yes, I exist. I'm still existing, if that's a word. Anyhow, for lack of anything better to do on my video today, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here if you just read and look at it. Anyhow, that's it. That's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.